Welcome to Big Blend Radio with your hosts, Lisa and Nancy, editors of BigBlendMagazine.com.
After listening to stories dominated by the male heroes of the coal mines, author Kimberly Collins tells the formerly untold story of the women of Appalachia in Blood Creek. It's through Blue Mingo Press. It's out now October 2019, and it's the first book of the Mingo Chronicles. Welcome to Big Blend Radio's Toast to Books and Authors show, where your hosts Nancy Reed and Lisa Smith, the mother-daughter travel team and publishers of two digital interactive publications. We have Big Blend Radio and TV Magazine, which is our variety travel lifestyle publication and magazine, and of course Parks and Travel Magazine that covers parks and travel, and our Love Your Parks tour where we're traveling the country full time. You can keep up with all of it at BigBlendMagazines.com. But most importantly, we're really thrilled to have Kimberly on the show today. Her book Blood Creek is out now. It just got released. And of course you can get on Amazon, all those great places. But welcome to the show, Kimberly. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
We're very excited. Nancy and I just started your book and you sucked us in like immediate. Like, yeah, you just, cool. You know, and then it's like, oh, we have things we have to do, but no, leave us alone. We want to read.
Great.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because this is about the coal mines and today's, you know, when you hear the word coal, it's like, oh, dirty coal, turn it off, all that, which, okay, yes. But way back when, we needed coal, and it transformed this country in regards to heat and fuel. So this is an interesting story that you take us way back to the early 1900s with this.
Yes, and I think it's important for people to know. And I, you know, in my author's note at the beginning of the book, I try to, you know, tee it up a little bit so people understand that I'm not necessarily making a pitch for let's all start, you know, burning coal like crazy again, but I think we need to not victimize and villainize the people of Appalachia and the coal miners, because coal did fuel this nation for a long time.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting.
Well, yeah, and it was the beginning of being civilized in a lot of aspects.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
It's interesting. We just came back from Colorado Springs, and we went to the Garden of the Gods, these giant redstone formations, beautiful park, and gentleman left it aside. I don't have his name in front of me, but he left it aside, and his family left it free for the public. And the gentleman who actually founded Colorado Springs was the man who brought coal to Colorado Springs, and he was like really a part of that. And when I was looking in the history of this park, who knew coal was all part of this, because they were all friends and everything. And it was tied to the railroad, and if you know, the two went hand in hand, it seemed like, informing this country's history. So it's pretty fascinating. I like that you're dealing with women, but you also talk about kids working in the coal mines, and that it wasn't, you know, teenagers.
Right. So, you know, way back when, you know, 100 years ago, the practice was to work everyone, the men and the children, 12, 14 hours a day. And they were working kids who were, you know, 11, 12, 13 years old, and they were in the mines working as babies. And it was just these deplorable conditions that we can't get, you can't imagine this now. Happening here in the United States, but yeah, they worked to everyone, and it was just indentured servitude, and that's the only way to categorize it. It was pretty gruesome work practices that we just can't get our mind around right now.
Yeah, it's, you know, when you think about it, you know, right now we have minimum wage. Back then, you know, you had mega rich bosses, and everybody who was doing the actual physical labor barely could feed their families on what they were paid.
Oh yeah,
and the hours were disgusting.
And then and in the coal mine, you know, they didn't even pay them with U.S. dollars. They paid them in scrip, and the only place they could spend the scrip was the company store, and they lived in company housing, and they had to pay rent on those company houses. So by the time they got paid, they owed everything back to the company. Wow. And I'm sure we all remember the song "I Owe My Soul to the Company Store," and that was literally the way it was. And they were in a financial pit that they could never dig their way out of, ever. It was just a way of the coal operators keeping these people under their thumb and keeping them under control. I mean, they told them what doctors they could go to, where their kids could go to school, what they could buy, where they could live. They controlled every aspect of their lives.
It's creepy. It's kind of like sharecropping and slavery, and just
Well, it is pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of similarities, definitely. And it just, and people, I've had people ask, well, why didn't they just leave? And it's like, well, it was 1910.
Yeah.
And where were they going to go? You know, these people came in, and West Virginia is a beautiful state. I mean, the mountains are just magical to me, and there are wild horses running around. And you know, 100 or so years ago, it was more lush. You know, before the strip mining and the mountaintop removal came in, it was just beautiful. And then someone figured out that there were extractable minerals in those hills, and they came in and they bought people's land. You know, they promised them the moon, and they gave them a pittance for their property, and then they gave them a job. I'm using air quotes here, and then they were indentured servants. Wow. More or less. And it was they had nowhere to go. They had no money to go anywhere. They had nothing.
Mm. And especially as a woman, I go to your main character, Ellie, and she is a naughty little lady, naughty new girl. She got around, let's put it that way. But, you know, the thought of leaving, you know, I'm at the beginning of the book, but she's got a lot of things going on. But, you know, the thought of, you know, being able to leave a husband or get divorced in an area like that, way back when, it wasn't just like, hey, I'm bored with my husband, I can move on to, you know, another dude if I want, and divorce. It wasn't that easy. Though it was available, it wasn't that easy to do.
Right. It wasn't easy. And if you did do it, it was, you know, you were just branded as, you know, the Scarlet Woman, and you were just this horrible person. But the reality is that Ellie was a real person, and Ellie really did some very questionable things. As you said, she was a naughty girl. And for that time, you know, she was shunned by almost everyone. And as you'll see in the next 2 books of Mingo Chronicles, her story gets a little more, oh my God, did this really happen? And a lot of things really, really did happen. But yeah, so it was a time, and even now, you know, it's a man's world in Appalachia, and coal has always been a man's job. So a short aside here to that. So my mother, you know, we grew up, my parents divorced when I was 11, 12 years old, and there were no jobs in southern West Virginia. The only game in town was coal. And my mother had worked minimum wage jobs, and she had 4 daughters to feed, and you know, my dad left town, and child support wasn't something that they made people pay in. So she's like, you know, I have 4 kids to feed. Coal is the only job there is. So she went and there's a 40-hour OSHA type class that you have to take. So she took the class. Her and a friend, a female friend, took the class together. They were the only women in the class. And then she goes and applies for a job in the mine. And the mine superintendent laughed at her and said, why should I give you, a woman, a job when I have men with families needing these jobs? Oh, yeah. And my mom has a short fuse, and she's like, you know, what are my 4 kids? You know, they don't count. And so then he told her that if she would give him some sexual favors, that he could slip her a couple of $100.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So she lit a fire under her. And so she and 7 other women filed a class action lawsuit against the coal mine for sexual discrimination. Wow. And cool. And they won. And this was the late 70s. Yeah. And they won. And they were, I think, the first, it was one of the first, if not the first, sexual discrimination case of that size that won. So they got back pay from the time they had applied, and they all got jobs. And then even after she goes in, you know, it was a small town, and everyone knew her. And some of the men resented these women being in there, but some of them were also very nice and kind to them because they had known my mother their whole lives. But yeah, but some of them gave her a really hard time,
Wow.
with it. So
Power to
yeah.
her, because it was, even class action suits now, we cover employment law on our shows all the time, and sexual harassment and discrimination.
Mm-hmm.
And even
Mm-hmm.
now, with the Me Too movement and everything, to be able to pull a
Yeah.
class action suit off,
Yeah.
especially if you're trying to keep a job and raise 4 kids, and
Mm-hmm.
that is almost impossible. And so,
Right.
wow, power to her and all the other women that stood up and
Well,
did that.
Yeah.
if you think back, probably at that time, most of the lawyers would have been male.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah, her
now
attorney was a man.
yeah, so you have to go find a sympathetic male,
Wow.
what I mean? So almost
Mhm.
everywhere you turn, there's going to be a roadblock that you have to
Yes.
overcome.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Did
Yeah.
this
So the whole industry has been so dominated by men in the area, and just the whole lifestyle for ever in Appalachia, it's been a man's world. So I think going back to the book, so for
Yeah.
Ellie and the other female characters in the story to play a prominent role in that, and I think they did. I mean, Mother Jones is the perfect example of how women really played a huge role in that. I just wanted their story to be told in all its glory. So
did it start for you to research all of this? I mean, understand living out in that area, but then with your mom and everything, did that kind of lead you down this pathway? Because like you're saying, Ellie's a real person, and really the characters, I mean, you really are, this is a true historical fiction piece where you're actually learning some history, but the characters, you may embellish here and there, right? So we're actually learning true stories.
right. So it started out this germ of an idea that I wanted to tell a story about the mine wars, about where I'm from, because I grew up hearing these stories forever, and my great grandfather and his brothers were very instrumental in the formation of the United Mine Workers Union in southern West Virginia. They were there. They were on the front lines fighting and doing all their things. So growing up, I had heard these stories. They just get told and retold and told and retold. And so, but I had always heard it from that male perspective. And I had always wondered when I was little, was like, well, what were the women doing? Because I have some pretty strong female people in my world here. I want to know what they were doing. And then I had a random conversation with my cousin Steve, and he was telling me a story about our great grandmother that will be in the next book in Mingo Chronicles. So I don't want to give it away, but he was telling me a story about some things that she went through when my grandfather had been arrested during the Matewan Massacre, and some horrible things that had happened to her. And I'm like, that's my story. That is the story I need to tell. So I started doing a lot of research, and I had known about Tom Chapin, who was Ellie's first husband in the book, because he is the great grandfather of my brother-in-law. And I knew about, so I knew about him and had kind of heard about Ellie, but didn't really know. So I'm talking to them and getting, some more details. And I happened upon in a book that I was reading for doing research, and they had just a snippet about Tom and Ellie. And I'm like, I need to know more. So I go to my brother-in-law and his cousins, and they're giving me all this information about Ellie. And I was captivated by Ellie. I was just smitten with her and her story, and how a woman in 1910 could be so promiscuous and not really care. She didn't care what anybody thought. And and that's what I tell people, that a few hundred years ago she would have been branded a witch, and for the sake of in 1910 she was just branded a whore. So and today they just call us crazy. So So I just wanted to tell Ellie's story. And so the first part one is pretty much true. Ellie and Tom's story, I stuck to the facts 99.9%. And then in part 2 of the book, Ellie kind of goes off into the land of fiction and my imagination. But in the next installment of the Mingo Chronicles, she pretty much comes back to her real story, which again, I just find it fascinating that in 1910, 1920, women were doing this with not a care at all what anyone thought.
Wow.
Whether it was bad, I mean, and she was naughty, she was promiscuous, she did some things that you or I might not ever even dream of doing, but yet it was that independence that she sought. So
yeah,
I just wanted to tell that story.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember my grandmother getting so excited when she could wear pants, and she bought a
Right.
little yellow pantsuit. That's back when they called them pantsuits for
Yeah.
women. And and she was so excited about it, and I was young, and I'm just like, what's the big deal, But now I understand. And her thing was she could, when she went grocery shopping, she could put the grocery bags in the trunk of the car, bending over and not worried about what she looked like from behind.
Wow.
And that was her big deal. She could finally dress comfortably to do the work that she was doing. And it just seems so crazy now.
Yeah,
Think of being told what you can and cannot wear.
Yep. Now you just wear whatever little piece of string on the runway.
Yeah, I know.
It's changed.
Well, I don't. Yeah. Well, I don't wear those little strings anymore.
No,
but I used to.
no strings. Listen, I want to comment on the book cover and your photography. Your photography is amazing, and because we do a lot of travel, a lot of photography with our magazines and everything, and I just love the soul you give nature. You put her there in this. You capture the essence of nature, I think, in really beautiful ways of just showing people like the little details that they won't necessarily capture. You go for a walk and walk by a dandelion but not know what is in the inside of the dandelion, that kind of thing.
Right.
The book cover is amazing, and it's interesting reading your work too, because you have a really beautiful flow to your photography and your writing, yet you know how to put in the details there, if that makes any sense there for people. But if that, but I think your writing and your photography are very connected. It's interesting to read and view.
Thank you.
Tell us about the cover.
So I like to compare. It's interesting you say that, because I like to compare my photography to my writing, because when I've been out with other people, some of them very talented photographers, and we will see, and I think this is true in life in general, that we will be looking at the same thing and see two totally different images. And I like to hone in on intricate details when I'm in my photography. I like to look inside the thing. And if I take a photo of you, I would rather take a photograph of your iris than your entire face. And I like.
Well, when you see my face, you'll probably want to do that.
But I like to do that in writing as well. I think it's those little details that make life interesting. But the cover photograph, I convinced my niece Natalie, who is also Tom Chapin's great granddaughter. So many threads connecting the story. It's the more I think about it, it's kind of bizarre. But I convinced her we took a trek, because we live in Tennessee. We took a trek to West Virginia for a photo shoot for the weekend. And my younger sister, was a part of the photo shoot too, and she'll show up in some photographs I published later. But we spent the whole weekend. We took probably 2,000 photos. I mean, it was just, they got in the river. We were on the railroad tracks. We almost got run over by a train. They were such sports. We were in a it was a train tunnel, and my brother-in-law said, I don't think any trains, because coal isn't moving up there now. He's like, there hasn't been a train through here in years. So we're literally on the railroad tracks. I'm lying down in the middle of the tracks taking photos, and I feel this rumble. And I'm like, well, okay, there are no earthquakes here, so that must be a train. And sure enough, here comes a train barreling, and we are jumping off the tracks. I'm like, okay, this is getting a little out of hand. But the photo in the river was just one of those magical moments. Natalie walks into the river, and I'm just snapping, and the dress just starts billowing out on the water.
That's awesome.
And it was just perfect. She was definitely my muse for Ellie.
Mm-hmm.
And I had not even written the scene. There's a scene in the book where Ellie's in the river, and I had not even written the scene yet. And then when I wrote the scene, I'm like, oh, I have a photograph for this. So it all just sort of magically came together.
Yeah,
But,
you're supposed to, I feel like you're supposed to have written this. Like there's just some things in life where you're destined to do it, like you're the chosen one, you know? And I think it's interesting because of the photography, because you're visual and detailed that way, that's where the flow comes in, because in the writing, because when we read, we're visual, right? We see the characters, we see the place, we see the Tug River. And that's something very important. Nancy and I, we always talk about James Michener and the importance of water. And you bring that into play with the story as well, the Tug River, the importance of it.
Oh, thank you. And the Tug River still plays, but when I was growing up, it was its own force. It would flood every spring. Sometimes it would flood in the fall, but every spring we all held our breath waiting for the town to flood. And then in 1977, we had a disastrous flood. It nearly wiped the entire town. Every town sitting along the river, it nearly wiped them off the map. And my little town was decimated. And then the Corps of Engineers came in and in their infinite wisdom decided, we're going to build a flood wall, which in theory and on paper, it was a great idea. But they built the wall so that it just enclosed the town and blocked it off from the flow of traffic. And the town has never fully recovered from that. And it's right. It's like, what were you thinking?
Well, I don't want to answer that.
Yeah,
I've got answers, but I won't. I'll behave.
Block the water, and that's their main objective, and they don't think beyond that one goal. Huh.
I know. Yeah.
That's
so,
funny.
but the town is trying to recover, and I think there's so much fabulous history there. Just the Hatfield-McCoy feud sparked right there in Matewan, and the Matewan massacre and the mine wars, and just so much amazing history that I'm hoping the town will figure out how to revive from that. Even the whole area, they're struggling with the tourism and figuring out how to make all of that work.
We interviewed family members, two gentlemen, one from the McCoy family and one from the Hatfield family, years and years ago, and they're still fighting.
Yeah.
Like it's never going to end.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. It doesn't. It's not going to end. I think when something gets started and it just kind of runs through your blood that way, it's like, okay, no, this is going to happen. But the mine wars, to me, that's I mean, stuff has been going on now about the coal mines and the mines up
Yes.
way. So it's kind of like, again, it's still following through, and it's interesting. The workers are working their butts off, and it is really about greed being the magic wand of of all of this. So it's when you think about the strikes and everything, going on strike, that's a big deal, because then what I look at towns, as we travel, mining towns, and they go bust, and it's the company town, and all of a sudden there's no town left. And then there'll be still a mine, and they go and pull their permits just so they don't have to reclaim the land and fix it. Yeah. And then everybody thinks the mine's coming back, and so they won't open a business. They won't look at responsible tourism, not Disneyland stuff. So it's this interesting thing that's still happening now, where it's through that generational, like that blood running through the veins. But thinking back to standing up, you're in trouble when you do that. I mean, how do you feed your family when you're barely feeding them anyway?
Right. And I think a lot of people in southern West Virginia, there's been a bit of a resurgence of coal. And I mean, if you go there now, you see coal moving. I mean, they're mining, coal is moving. And I think there's that hope that it will be what it used to be. But the reality is that it has always been a boom and bust cycle over and over and over and over. And it may stay steady for what it is right now, but it's never going to be the king again. And I think that's a hard reality for people to face. But the epic tragedy, and this happens just like you said, in all these towns where these industries come in and rape the land and leave, and there's no sustainability for what happens when this leaves. Because when I was growing up, it was coal, and every industry was about coal. Everything served coal, everything. There was nothing else, and everyone just assumed that it would always last because it had always been there. It will always be here. And so the people aren't, and the people, the government, from the local city government, the county government, the state government, it's like they're just not prepared now to fix it. And there's no infrastructure to provide for anything else. And my opinion is that tourism would be amazing, because we go up and we go four-wheeling, and they're really trying to make that a thing, because we have these beautiful mountains and everyone likes to go four-wheeling and mudding and get dirty and do all that. And it is so much fun. And there are wild horses everywhere, and there are beautiful wild flowers and trees and the river. And it's just a spectacular place. And it is wild and wonderful. There's nothing else to describe it. It's wonderful. But I don't know why they can't quite figure it out. And I say this from a government level down to the people who live there, how to, what's that magic bullet that makes it a place where people just really want to go, and that it's something sustainable economically for the people who live there.
They have to go outside of their area. That's what we do. I mean, we travel full time going, and most of the places we travel to are small towns, because they need our help more than anything. And those are small parks. And a lot of times when we go to a town, we'll go around with a visitor bureau or a chamber of commerce. And especially on the chamber of commerce side, by the time we've gone around the town, they'll go, I never thought of looking at it this way. I didn't expect people to think this was interesting. So a lot of times it's I don't want to say taken for granted, but it's become, it's like wearing your favorite shawl, that you don't realize that it could be a favorite of someone else's too, because you've worn it for so many years that you're going to go, oh, well, it's tattered on this side. Well, it's still beautiful to someone else. So there's that part of not going out and seeing it, but it is about being responsible in parks and nature and history. Those things are what can really not have, like, where you have to have huge infrastructure, but you do need to do some infrastructure. When you fix your town for the locals, you're really fixing it for the community. And for tourism. So I think tourism is the key, but I'm not talking Disneyland crazy. You know what I mean? It's that light footprint of bird watchers and people coming to see museums and art and the nature, like you're saying, wildflowers. And I want to go. I mean, reading your book and looking at your phone, I'm like, I want to go. We need to go.
Well, come. We can definitely plan a trip.
Yeah, let's do it. We want to go. Nancy, you want to go?
That would be great.
We'll go see wild horses there. We've seen them in the Southwest, but I didn't even know West Virginia had wild horses still. That's beautiful. They're killing them over here.
And
are they truly
and they're
wild?
so friendly.
Are they feral or are they wild?
So, and that I don't have the answer to that. My understanding is that someone had some horses that they didn't want. They couldn't take care of them. So they took them up in the hills and in the mountains, and they turned them loose. Yeah. But people still take hay, they take food, they take care of them. And then, the horses are mating and they're having babies. And so I don't know, what do you call the babies? Are they just wild? We call them wild horses.
Well, they're wild in that they're not captive, but the experts would say they're feral. like
I
the
say
Bureau
they're
of Land
beautiful.
Management will say they're feral.
And then they'll take them. Well, that's what out here in the Southwest, we've just had these wild horse and burro
Yeah, it's a
wars,
big drama out
you know,
here.
and here's interesting because we have the burros and they use the little burros in the mines. And so West Virginia, they were using mules, right? They were taking mules into the mines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because even you go to little dinky-doo towns like Oatman in Arizona, it's right near Kingman off of Route 66, and you'll still see some of the burros in the hills. They walk down the streets of the town, and people feed them
People get
carrots.
Carrots. It's cool.
And then, you know, they might bite your butt as you turn around. I've seen that with a friend of mine. Got this, did one. I have a photo of the donkey biting Chris's butt.
But that's,
Nice.
guys should not have rhinestones on their back pockets.
Yeah,
because
really.
donkeys
Yeah,
bite 'em.
Chris. Yeah, right. But if they're there, but then the BLM, there's like this huge war, and then some of these horses, and they'll say they didn't, are getting shipped up for slaughter for horse meat, and people eating them. And I don't anyway. I don't want to get into all that, but it's just it you know, to me, there's something about Appalachia. Just saying Appalachia, I want to go just for that. But just the hiking, like the Appalachian Trail, and that whole area to me sounds, you know, I love Southern fiction because there's this added little, there's always dark and dirty drama. Someone did something really bad and you've got dark and dirty. And then at the same time, there's this little like, well, you know, like superstitions and like, I don't know, there's like this mystical twinkly quality that you go, what was that? You know, and you never know. You never know. So you've got a series. So this is the first of the series, which is very exciting. Do you want to see that? I know you've written a screenplay and been successful with that. Do you see this as like a TV series, like on Netflix or something?
Would that be cool?
I do.
Absolutely.
Sweet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's just getting it in front of the right people is the trick. But yeah, I can see this being just a wonderful long running series. I mean, I have 2 more books to write. I mean, and even Blood Creek on its own is a lot of story.
Good title,
it turned out to be, thank you. It turned out to be a lot more story than I had set out to write. But as I kept writing, it's like the voices in my head kept talking. And so I just kept writing. And I think that the next 2 books, the next book is called The Massacre. And, you know, we're going to jump 8 years into the future, into 1920, for the Matewan Massacre. And then in the final book, the 3rd book, will be about the Battle of Blair Mountain. And it's unnamed. That book is unnamed at this point, but it is a lot of story. It is definitely a saga. And I think that it would be a fabulous story to bring to the screen. Absolutely.
Wouldn't it be fun to pick out the actors and actresses? Especially since you're related to these people. You go around looking for people who look like you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, and as I'm writing though, oddly enough, so my first book, Simple Choices, I could actually see people playing these parts. But for Blood Creek, I don't have anyone in my head for any of these characters. The only, even for Ellie, and I think it might just be because they're young, and I don't know about enough young actresses to know who to choose for her. But there's a young girl on a show, and I cannot remember the name of the show. Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of the show, but she's Israeli actually, and she's beautiful, and she plays a vixen. It's where they're like imposters is the name of the show. Imposters, yeah. And I don't know her name, but she played on Imposters. She's got this long black hair and these big black eyes, and she's gorgeous. And she would be the perfect Ellie, just in the essence of Ellie.
Yeah.
But no, I think it would make a great series.
And I own the soundtrack. You need Ryan Bingham to do the soundtrack. I'm like, and his wife does movies. Like, she's an independent filmmaker. That's how they met. He did the soundtrack for her movie or something like that.
Cool.
And I think you should just go call him because
okay.
Yeah, he'd go hang out in West Virginia, in the hills of West Virginia. I know that he would, you know. But hey, I've got good music coming up for you too. That is, it's the hills of West Virginia. But if you could get together on the river, right, and have some moonshine with your characters, and have like a little moonshine picnic party, who's going?
Yeah, right. So I definitely know where we can get some good moonshine.
Okay.
That's a staple when we go up and go four-wheeling.
That sounds healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a tree on the
Yeah,
left. Well, there's
let the
10
drunk
of them
guy
now.
drive. Yeah.
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 Gosh. So you're gonna get the moonshine. Who would you take?
For the ride, for the just the characters going for a ride.
Just going off for moonshine together, where you can just hang out with them, even though you hang out and talk to them when you're riding. Who would you go moonshining with in the book?
Oh my goodness! In the book, definitely Ellie, and I think I might be a little bit in love with Deacon. I might be. Sammy would definitely have to come with his fiddle.
We need a fiddle player.
And we need a fiddle player for sure. And I guess Jolene and Polly would have to join us as well, for sure.
And everyone, you can find out about these characters by reading the book Blood Creek. It is out now. Of course, you can go to Amazon, all those great online places, and hey, listen, I see museum exhibits like with the characters in the book and everything. I know there's bookshops and book signings and all those tours that all you authors get to do. And this is totally book club material for sure. Like especially up in that region. To get people to learn their history, I think this would be so cool. But you need a museum exhibit. I think, just like maybe.
I like the way you think.
Yeah, I'm just like a traveling museum exhibit going around the country teaching people about Appalachia and the characters. It's cool. And you know what? I love that you put Ellie in there because there's we know some authors that really do take care of telling all women's stories, the good, bad, and the naughty. And then there's the history side of women who don't want to, we're all Mother Teresas, and that's not true. And I think to be a criminal, to do something bad, you have to be smart. So I like you have the brains to do it. So I really appreciate that too, and so, but she is a naughty girl and smart. So anyway, so everybody, again, go to bluemingopress.com and keep up with Kimberly through her website and social media, and sign up for a newsletter so you can make sure you get the second book because you're going to want it. I already know. And we're going to play a song. It's called The Hills of West Virginia. It's by Blind Lemon Pledge, and it's off the album Backwood Glances. I think it's perfect. You've got your soundtrack now. And you can go to blindlemon-pledge.com to get his music. And everyone, don't forget, keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. We air our episodes Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sundays. The best thing to do is sign up for our newsletter. It comes out once a week. You'll either get a magazine in your email or the latest interviews and articles. So thanks so much for joining us, Kimberly. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. I've enjoyed this.
Yes, let's get some moonshine now.
All right.
My brother Jeb left Saturday. Where he gone can no one say. Ain't no surprise he went away. It's so cold in the hills of West Virginia. Sister-in-law moans through the night. Her baby's bald till morning lights. The way Jeb left, it wasn't right. It's so cold in the hills of West Virginia. It's cold, blowing cold. Bitter tears turn to ice in the snow. And even though cold fire is burning down below, it's so cold in the hills of West Virginia. We had us jobs in Freeman's mine, and Daddy did too in his time. The way it ended was a crime. One day we showed and the gates was locked forever. Just to survive, I was dealing lewds. But Jeb had morals, he refused. I said we can't afford that attitude. It's so cold in the hills of West Virginia. It's cold, blowing cold. Bitter tears turn to ice in the snow. And even though cold fire is burning down below, it's so cold in the hills of West Virginia. It's cold, blowing cold. Bitter tears turn to ice in the snow. And even though cold fire is burning down below, it's so cold in the hills of West Virginia. My baby's crawling across the floor. They shut my credit at the store. Don't know if I can take much more. It's so cold in the hills of West Virginia. It's so cold in the hills of West Virginia. It's so cold in the hills of West Virginia. It's so cold in